Hey everybody, it's Chris from Family Geekery, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at some cables and connectors specifically for connecting solar panels to portable power stations or solar generators. And these portable power stations are so convenient they don't have to be run by solar, but if you're going to be camping or using them for overlanding or for emergency backup power, then eventually you're going to get a solar panel, and you want to make sure that solar panel is compatible both physically and electrically with your portable power station. So we're going to be looking at some cables and connectors to make sure that you get them hooked up correctly. Now I'm going to be bringing out some portable power stations and looking at the inputs to them. I'm going to be bringing out some solar panels, looking at the outputs to them. And then we're going to be looking at some cables here because you may need to convert your output to your input. And the fine people at Tauntaun have sent me some cables to help demonstrate these different types of connectors. So thank you to Tauntaun for sending these cables. We're going to take a look at them. These are all very high quality, so I'll have some links down below if you're interested in getting any of these. But let's start talking about some connectors. And I'm going to start with the simplest connector here. Let's dig this one out. And this is the, let's call it cigarette lighter adapter. So cigarette lighter plug right here. You've seen this on all kinds of devices. Usually plug it into your car because you got a cigarette lighter or auto accessory port in there. And it's just an easy way to get 12 volts out of your car. Now, why are we looking at this and this solar application? Well, this is a valid way to charge your power station. In fact, this one right here is a 12 volt cigarette lighter plug that adapts to a couple different DC plugs here that will go into a Jackery power station. And we'll talk about these different sizes here in a second. But maybe if you're going camping or overlanding, you want to charge up your power station in between stops, you can just plug this into your cigarette lighter plug. Plug this into your power station. You can usually guess about 100 watts is usually the output from your cigarette lighter plug, and that's usually a good input for your power station. So 100 watts isn't a ton of power, but it's enough if you're going to be taking a couple hour drive. You can usually top off your power station pretty easily with that. Now, these don't have to be just for charging your power station. You can also use something like this to go from one power station to another power station. So for example, I've got a really large power station here at home that can accept a lot of solar input from a lot of panels. And if I want to take that power and put it into a smaller power station, well, maybe that smaller power station doesn't have enough solar input to take all the power from all my solar panels. So I just get all the power I can into that big station and then plug this into the big station's DC port and then plug the other side into the smaller station and basically use the big power station as a pass-through for the big solar array to go into the smaller power station. So like I said, very versatile, very easy to understand connector here, cigarette lighter plug. We are good with that one. So let's move next to probably what's the most important connector, and that's going to be the MC4 connector. Now a lot of solar stuff here uses these MC4 connectors, and we've got right here both a positive and a negative, a red and black, and these are basically used for a lot of solar applications, especially if you're going to have something outdoors. And that's because these connectors here are much better rated at protecting the wires from any kind of moisture. So they are usually IP65 waterproof, and they make a nice solid connection. You can see you've got a little O-ring here to keep the water from getting into the contacts. So you'll usually find these maybe coming out of a solar panel, and then you can use these on extension cables, and then you can use these to adapt to another connector that's going to go to your power station. So you usually won't find this particular MC4 connector on your power station, but sometimes your power station will come with a cable that adapts these to what it needs for the solar input. We'll look at that. But usually this is the best way to get all the way from the solar panel all the way to your closest adapter to your power station, and then for that last little jump, you're going to use some kind of adapter, which is exactly what this is. This is an adapter that goes from MC4 connectors to an XT60, which is going to be the next connector that we talk about. Before we look at that, let's look at a couple more applications of these MC4 connectors. So I mentioned you may need to have some kind of an extension in between your solar panel and your power station. So if your solar panel has MC4 connectors coming out of it, and then your adapter, like this adapter here, has MC4 connectors going into it, you're going to need something that goes in between them to extend from MC4 to MC4. Now what makes an extension special is if you look at both these right here, this adapter and this adapter, both the negative leads here, the black ones, are both what we would call the male connector, and then both the reds are the female connector. Well, what's special about the extension is you're going to have the exact opposite of that on the other side. So if I just look at this little Y adapter that we're going to talk about just in a second, and think about this as being a very short extension cable. On this red leg here, we've got the female on one side and we've got the male on the other side. So you would get a length of wire, whatever it is, maybe 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet, whatever the length is, and you would have those connectors on either side to extend your adapter all the way out to wherever your solar panel is. Now, once you start extending things out, one thing you want to make sure you look at is what the wire gauge is, and that's usually listed on the sales page of these different cables as AWG, and then there's going to be a number, and the smaller the number, the thicker the cable. So an AWG 10 is a thicker cable than AWG 14. And why that matters is the thicker the cable is, the less voltage you're going to lose over the long length. So if you're going to have a very long extension cable, maybe 50 feet or so, you may want to buy a smaller gauge or bigger gauge, I guess, smaller number extension cable so that you lose less voltage. The other reason you need to worry about the gauge is depending on how much current and how much power you're going to be putting down that wire. If you have a very large solar array, then you're going to need to use a thicker cable to handle all that power. We may cover that in a separate video. Right now we're just going to keep talking about these cables and connectors. So we've got a solar panel with some connectors, we've got an adapter with some connectors. Let's talk next about, since we're still talking about MC4, let's talk about these splitters here. Now if you have just one solar panel coming straight to your power station, no big deal. But if you've got two solar panels, then you have to start thinking about how are you going to connect both of those to your power station. Some power stations have multiple inputs. Some power stations just have a single input. And if it has a single input, then you use something like this. In this case, we've got both a positive splitter and a negative splitter. And in this case, we would be wiring those two solar panels in parallel. And we're going to cover parallel and series parallel connections in a separate video. But just generically speaking right now, if you need to set them up in parallel, then you're going to need some kind of splitter like this. Now this would accept two. If we look at something like this would be what they might call a branch connector. This looks like it would take from 3 solar panels or 3 strings of solar panels into one. So again, we've got 3 females going to a male on this positive, 3 males going to a female on the negative, and they make these in larger sizes than 3 also. But just know that if you have multiple things that you need to plug in, that's what you're going to use a splitter for. So now we're good with these splitters, we're good with the MC4 connectors. Let's look at this guy that we talked about a little bit earlier. This is called a XT60 connector, and you're going to find this as an input to a lot of your power stations. So if you're lucky, your power station may come with a cable that's similar to this, which is going to be MC4 to XT60, or some power stations may even come with a cigarette lighter plug to XT60. So they may use that same input for both solar input and for DC input from a cigarette lighter plug. So XT60, very popular connector. We'll look at that on a couple power stations here in just a minute. And the XT60 even has a newer version of it called the XT60i, which looks very similar, but it has a third contact in between these two here. And you'll see just a little piece of metal right in between these two poles here. And the XT60i is a newer one, which will handle more power than the original XT60. But let's go ahead and shift gears over to what I'm going to call a barrel connector. And if we look at this MC4 cable, which came with the power station, it's got on the other end of it just a DC plug. So we call this a barrel plug or barrel connector or DC plug. And you've seen these a lot on all kinds of electronics. Usually if you have some kind of a power brick that you plug into the wall and it converts it to this little plug here that's going to plug into your device, whether it's a cable modem or laptop or whatever it is. In this case, it's the same thing. It's taking the DC from your solar panels or whatever's providing it, and it's putting it onto a plug like this that you can use to plug into your power station. Now, unfortunately, there's more than one standard of these. There's different sizes, and when you look at the different sizes, you look at usually 2 main dimensions. That's going to be the outer diameter and the inner diameter. So you've got the outer diameter is the distance that makes up the outside of this plug here, and then inside there's usually a pin or some kind of connector that goes inside there, and that has a size also. So you need to make sure both of those match, and we'll look at some examples here. Back on this cable here that we looked at, that was a cigarette lighter plug to, again, this type of DC barrel connector. This would go into a Jackery, and Jackery had a couple different sizes. So they had both a DC 8020 and a DC 7909, and depending on the model that you had 2 different sizes of outer diameters and inner diameters. They're very close, but they're not perfectly compatible. So in this case, this cable from TomTom comes with an adapter to go from, I believe, the DC8 here to the 7909. I might have those backwards, but basically it's just a DC plug, just different sizes. You've got bigger ones like that, or smaller ones like this, and then several sizes in between. So you may even see them listed as something like 5525, and what that means is it's 5.5 millimeters outer diameter and then 2.5 millimeters inner diameter. So if you see a 5525 versus a 5521, then you know that the outer diameter is the same, but the inner diameter is different by about 4 millimeters, or rather 0.4 millimeters. All right, and the last cable we're going to look at here is kind of the jack of all trades. Again, this came from TomTom, and it is an MC4 cable that goes to all these different adapters. So on these, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different DC barrel jacks. We've got the XT60, and then we have the Anderson plug here. So you may find these, I usually find them on older models. It's a very standard DC connection, but I don't see them very much on some of the newer power stations. But this one cable here will go from your solar panel or your extension and allow you to adapt to a bunch of different sizes. So this is very handy to have, especially if you have multiple power stations or if you're always losing your cables like me. So that doesn't comprise every single connector that's out there. That's just probably what I'd call the greatest hits. Let's go ahead and grab a power station and some solar panels and look how these might connect together. Alright, so once you start combining solar panels with power stations, sometimes you can just buy them in a set and they come already with the right connections and everything. But sometimes you can save some money if you just go with what I'll call a generic panel. So in this case, we got this EBL panel here, which is not an EcoFlow brand, but it's just something you can get on Amazon. And we've got an EcoFlow River 2 power station here. So we need to make sure that we can connect these things together. So if we look on the back of this EcoFlow, you're going to see the input jack here is going to be an XT60. So this little yellow connector here is the XT60 that we looked at before. If we look at the output from the little cable that's coiled up in this little zippered pouch here, is an MC4. So luckily we've got a panel that's, again, let's call it generic. So it's got generic plugs here. So in this case, we're just going to need to grab our XT60 to MC4 cable adapter here. And when we plug these things in, you'll see that the two reds here from the panel is going to be a male connector. So luckily on the adapter, it's female. So we're just going to plug these in, snap them together. And then same thing with the negative connectors. Going to plug those in together. And then assuming I had this outside and it had good sun coming to it, then we're going to just plug in this XT60 plug here right into this XT60 jack, and we're ready to rock. Now this seems a good place to warn you that just because you have the right connections and just because you have the right adapters does not mean that this is definitely compatible with this. You do need to look at the voltage and the current outputs of your panel, the voltage and the current inputs of your power station, the total maximum power coming from the panel, the total maximum power that comes into your power station, and make sure that those are all compatible. I'm going to have another video that talks you through all of that to make sure you don't plug something in wrong, because a good example of that is if you have too strong of a panel and you plug it into a too small of a power station, it can absolutely damage this power station. So you don't want to damage something. Obviously, you pay a lot of money for this. You don't want to plug something into it and blow it up. So make sure you do heed the cautions of your voltage max and your current max. But assuming you got all that right and you check that all out, easy connection from your MC4 coming out of the panel through the adapter right into your power station. Now, one thing to mention about these MC4s, I told you that they were a very good connection for making sure that they don't come unplugged because they lock together and making sure they don't let any moisture in. But the downside is sometimes they can be a little stubborn to take apart. But don't worry, they sell these guys here. You get them for a couple bucks a piece, or they usually sell them in several kits. I'll throw some links down for Amazon, and it gives you these little prongs here to push into the side here to make it very easy to disconnect. So if you're going to be making and breaking a bunch of MC4 connections, I would go ahead and grab one of these tools here. Just a couple bucks, like I said, save your fingers and save your fingernails from getting all messed up from those connectors. Alright, so let me grab a different combination and we'll look at another example. Alright, next up I'm going to show you an example of what I'd call a matched pair. In this case, we're looking at a Pacron E300 LFP power station and a Pacron 100-watt portable solar panel. And you can buy these separately, but you can also buy these in a pair, and that's what I did here. And when you do that, you do want to still double check all of your voltages and stuff and all your currents and power maximums to make sure that everything's compatible. But when they sell them in a pair, there's usually a pretty good chance that they are compatible. So if we look at what's at the other end of this cable, that comes in this zippered pouch here, we're looking at one of those barrel connectors, so a DC connector. So if we turn this Pacron power station here to the side, look underneath here, we've got the same size jack here. So it even lists on here what the voltage and what the power maximums are. Just plug that in and you are good to go. So very simple. Like I said, if you buy two things that are designed to work together, it makes it very easy. The downside to that is it doesn't make it super easy if you buy two of these to plug it into here. Now that would be more than the allowable maximum would be anyways. So I guess that's a good thing that it's not too easy to connect these things together. But usually if you have barrel connectors, they're a little bit harder to split. They do make splitters. I think Jackery makes some splitters, but they're not cheap. You would want to usually use all your splitting and stuff with your MC4 connectors. Now what if I bought this power station here and I bought that other solar panel, that EBL that has those MC4 connectors on it? That'd be a perfect application for buying one of these 7-in-1 adapters here. Use your MC4 connectors to go to the solar panel, and then of all these different DC power plugs, I bet you there's one, maybe this one right here. Nope, maybe this one right here. Yep, and that one fits perfectly. So in that case, you could either buy an adapter that was similar to this, which was just MC4 to the right size barrel, if you knew exactly what that size was, or you can get one of these multi-adapters that has a bunch of different DC plugs on them. So hopefully that helps you understand all the differences of the different types of connectors and how to make them compatible between your solar panel and your power station. If you're still in the market for a power station, look at the listing that says what's included and see what comes with it. It may come with solar adapters, it may just come with a power plug for the wall, but that way at least you can start planning for what type of solar panel you need and possibly what kind of adapters you may need. But like I said, this doesn't cover every single connector out there, just kind of the most common ones that you may see. If you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and drop them down in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer anything I can. I hope this was helpful to you. If it was, I appreciate a thumbs up. That helps out the channel. Go ahead and check out the rest of the channel. I've got lots of reviews on different portable power stations. If you're still in the market, go ahead and watch some of those reviews, see which one works best for you, and ask me some questions. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. I thank you as always for watching, and until next time, peace out and geek out.